They decide to plant a virus in the banking system to embezzle fraction of cents on each financial operation into Peter's account. However, Michael commits a mistake in the software on the decimal place, and they siphon off over $300,000. The desperate trio tries to fix the problem, return the money, and avoid going to prison.
Thank you, Josh. When you read the synopsis, the movie sounds a lot more crazy because there is hypnotism, Peter changes. I watched it, and it's not as straightforward. It does feel like just a workplace comedy, but there's a lot of interesting choices. But again, maybe that's to be expected from the creator of Beavis and Butthead. Josh, do you know what the inspiration for this film was, where this came from?
I know Mike Judge I think he was a computer programmer, and based it on his experiences of being cubicles drudgery. It felt like it came from a very personal place. And like things like the printer.
Hello and welcome. My name is Garth Sharif.
I'm Josh Sager.
And you're listening to The Fraud Complex, a podcast where we unpack wild, true crime fraud stories without the murders. Josh, do you know what a copycat crime is? What do you think of when you hear that?
I think of when a crime is publicized, you often hear about serial killer copycats. If one person does a crime, there's people that come out of the woodwork and imitate that crime. It's a big problem.
It's a problem. And because this podcast is without murders, we cannot talk about the copycat side of things that end up in serial killers, like the Zodiac Killer. I'm talking about this now. I'm not supposed to on this podcast. But non-murder copycats, Gemini helped me out. I'm going to give Gemini some credit, even though I don't feel like I should. Gemini actually probably stole this and copycatted it from someone else. But high-profile art thefts is an example of a copycat crime. And the other one that Gemini said was flash mob robberies. Have you heard of was this a thing? I don't think this is still happening. Flash mob robberies. This is what Gemini's telling me. Retail thefts where groups quickly overwhelm a store to steal items. Inspired by social media.
So fun. It's just like when school's out and, hey guys, let's go to the Foot Locker. When I cough, everybody grabs something and they can't arrest 30 of us. So fun.
Terrible fun. Like when you're saying fun, you're thinking about young Josh.
Yeah.
The Josh of his youth. You are thinking about current Josh, which you can tell us.
If I could go back
if you would love to participate in a flash mob robbery.
If I could go back to like middle school, where you're not going to get charged as an adult, I feel like that was a missed opportunity to pull off some big, fun flash mob theft.
Okay. And we're going through your risk register, your risk profile, because we know that you will not do something with that much risk, but knowing that you would be prosecuted to the fullest as a minor, as a child, would you feel a sense of regret that you did take more advantage of this opportunity? Yeah, is that what I'm hearing?
Now I have to wait till I'm so advanced in age, they just take pity on you. I feel like there's a window when it's safe to do crime with my threshold of risk tolerance. It's very early or very late. And yeah, so I've got some decades to wait.
I feel like there was a movie where a bunch of old people committed crimes because they felt like they were not going to face the consequences. But that is something that you are aspiring to do.
Part of me wishes, I lived a little more freely. So this podcast is me vicariously living through others who were free enough to follow their deepest, darkest urges and stealing great, vast sums of money.
We're going to get into it then. We're going to inspire you some more in this. Again, not the purpose of this podcast, but the purpose of it for you. So this is going to seem like a non sequitur, but we're going to get into it. Josh, do you remember a film from 1999 by the creator of Beavis and Butthead, Michael Judge, called OfficeSpace?
I certainly do. In college, this was my go-to movie. I just put it on and sometimes I'd watch the whole movie, but I would almost always watch up to the midpoint. Like the first half of that movie, I feel like I've seen 50 times. And then the rest of it I've seen a bunch of times as well. It's one of my favorites.
It is hilarious. It's a cult classic now because I saw it in the theater when it came out in 1999, and it did mediocre, if not less than mediocre. But it is found life because it is very funny. There's some parts I just watched it in preparation for this podcast, and so we're gonna get into the movie because there's a reason for us to talk about Office Space, not just because you and I love the movie and think it's hilarious, but there's also a connection to the purpose of our podcast. So I would assume not everybody that's listening to us has watched the film, which is a shame. You should go out right now. You could even pause this podcast to go watch that film because I think there's some things that maybe get a little dated over time, but definitely you should watch it. So I could ask you for a synopsis of this film, but it is a tricky film to give a summary of. So I went to IMDb, and this is just for our listeners who don't know anything about this film. I just want to set this up, okay? It is really an Office Space satire. Josh, were you working in an office when this movie came out? Was there?
Yeah, I have had many office jobs over the years, temp jobs, full-time desk jobs. So this movie really resonated with me. Lifeless cubicles, bosses, entitled, self-satisfied bosses.
Do you remember the boss's name? The guy?
Oh, what the hell is it?
Yeah.
I can't remember his name. Lumberg.
Dale Lumberg. There's a lot of quotable lines from this movie, and we're going to try to not make this about the film, but we will a little bit, of course. If you worked in an office, just like you did, Josh, and I did, there's a lot of things you'll relate to in this film. But let me just set this up for those that maybe haven't seen the film. And again, it's a shame. Even if you're young, Gen Z, Gen Y, whatever generation you're from, I think there's a lot that still applies. I've sent Josh a synopsis from IMDb just to give you a sense of what this film is about. Josh, do you want to read the synopsis or part of the synopsis?
Yeah. So in the Initech office, the insecure Peter Gibbons hates his job, and the obnoxious division VP Bill Lumberg, who has just hired 2 efficiency consultants to downsize the company. His best friends are 2 software engineers, Michael Bolton and Samir Nanajah, that also hate Initech.
Wow.
Thank you. I'm pleased I nailed that. And his intrusive next-door neighbor, Lawrence. He believes his girlfriend Anne is cheating on him, but she convinces Peter to visit the hypnotherapist, Dr. Swanson. Peter tells how miserable his life is, and Dr. Swanson hypnotizes him, and he goes into a state of ecstasy. However, Dr. Swanson dies immediately after giving the hypnotic suggestion to Peter. Peter, in his new state, starts to date the waitress Joanna and changes his attitude. Jennifer Aniston. At the height of her popularity. I mean,
Peak of her powers, yeah.
Yeah, incredible. Which results in his being promoted by the consultants. When he discovers that Michael and Samir will be downsized, they decide to plant a virus in the banking system to embezzle fraction of cents on each financial operation into Peter's account. However, Michael commits a mistake in the software on the decimal place, and they siphon off over $300,000. The desperate trio tries to fix the problem, return the money, and avoid going to prison.
Thank you, Josh. When you read the synopsis, the movie sounds a lot more crazy because there is hypnotism, Peter changes. I watched it, and it's not as straightforward. It does feel like just a workplace comedy, but there's a lot of interesting choices. But again, maybe that's to be expected from the creator of Beavis and Butthead. Josh, do you know what the inspiration for this film was, where this came from?
I know Mike Judge I think he was a computer programmer and based it on his experiences of being drudgery, cubicles, drudgery. It felt like it came from a very personal place. And like things like the printer, there's a whole subplot about a printer in the office. So this resonated.
We're going to get to that. We're going to get to the printer. There's a lot of things if you work in an office, you're like, yeah, I get it. And you're right. So and I keep calling him Michael Judge. I guess it's Mike Judge. That's the way he goes by. Mike Judge. He was an engineer, and he's inspired to create this world in Initech. But of course, he's also someone who likes absurdist comedy, so there's other elements to it. The other part to this that influenced the film was he was a cartoonist. And he had created something called Milton's OfficeSpace. Do you remember the character Milton?
Yeah, so good. The little nebbish guy who was obsessed with his stapler and just...
Oh, you can open. I gave you an image, and one of the images is a key item, and you've already named it in the film, which is Milton's. If you see it there, I think I sent you an image of it.
Oh yeah, I see it. The
that stapler. Yeah, it's funny because he's not a main character, even though he does a lot of things that drive the plot, to be honest with you. But that was the center of the comic. But the film was around these three people: Peter, Samir, and Michael Bolton, which they get a lot of run out of with his name. He was inspired by his comic to bring Milton into the film space, but the setting was really inspired, as you said, by his engineering background and exactly what you said. Like, your experience working in an office, because this is actually going to get to the Fraud Risk Triangle. What were the parts that you didn't like about your office life when you were watching this film and you could say, oh, I relate to that? What was it that you felt like, this movie connects to me?
I worked at a lot of companies where it was like a small company and every little break you took was being notated. And there was something so horrible about just having to go in and pretend to be pleasant the whole day and just having that like facade where you're like, oh, this is nonsense. I hate every second of this meeting. There's no reason for me to be here, but I have to pretend I'm engaged. And so I always felt very false being in an office setting because I just wanted to make jokes and be a human. And it never felt like that would be appropriate.
That's amazing because that's exactly where we meet Peter in this film. Peter is already there. Do you remember how this movie starts? I think it's hilarious. So I watched this movie. It's hilarious how this movie starts. I don't know if you remember it. I can tell you how it starts if you don't remember. Do you remember? Gridlock. It's hilarious. I remember watching this scene and I'm like, because the movie is starting. There's this kind of comedic music in the background. There's a lot of hardcore rap in this movie, interesting enough. Gangster rap, a lot of explicit words. But it doesn't start out with that soundtrack, even though Michael Bolton is playing one of those songs. But they're gridlocked. And he does the thing that everyone does when you're in 3 lanes of gridlocked traffic trying to get to work. He sees one lane moves, and he switches over.
Yeah.
And as soon as he switches over to that lane, it stops moving. And then he sees the lane he just left starting to move. He switches back. And all the while, a man in a walker, an older man in a walker, is moving faster than the traffic, which is hilarious. I think it gets you into the movie of feeling exactly how you felt. Like, I'm going to this place I don't like, I don't feel connected, and not to even get there is a hassle. Mm-hmm. That brought me in. Do you remember what happens immediately? Because this is going to get to rationalization. We're going to get into the fraud risk triangle. This is about fraud. Because you did mention the fraud that took place in this movie, and we're going to talk about that. That's actually going to be the center of this. And I'm going to relate it back to the first question I asked you. But do you remember what happens? It gets into work. Do you remember what happens? Like, it's that kind of drab, cubicles everywhere. Initech is a tech company. He's a programmer. He gets to his computer. And already there is the sense that he is trapped. Do you remember what happens almost immediately when he gets in the office?
I feel like his boss immediately is on his ass about some report, TPS report, something like that.
TPS report.
Yeah, and it's just some nonsensical cover sheet he gets ambushed by like his boss and maybe other people who he makes one mistake and he hears about it like a bunch of different times from a bunch of different people and he just wants to kill himself.
Look at your memory for this movie because I watched it is exactly what happened. The TPS report, this cover sheet, and Bill Lumbergh comes in. Yeah, Peter. Did you get the memo about? Now I'm not doing a good Bill Lumbergh. Okay, this is the memo about the cover sheets on this TPS report. And Peter, the actor, I forget his name, who's playing him, is amazing. He's like, yeah, I got the memo.
Ron Livingston.
Ron Livingston, exactly. I just forgot. He's trying to just say, yeah, I got it. And to be honest with you, he makes an argument that he hasn't even released the TPS report to anybody, so he could, it's not even a mistake yet. And, and Lumbergh keeps going. He's like ignoring him completely. There was a memo. And he gets, I have the memo. And then he leaves and goes, you know what? I'm going to get you another memo. Right? And then moments later, another person comes into his cubicle and tells him, hey, Peter, did you get the memo? And then he gets a phone call about it. All this happens in the first 5 minutes after. And it sets up this sense of him not being connected to the organization, him not feeling motivated. because that's going to get into rationalization, right? Because that's really what Mike Judge. I don't know why Michael Bolton, Mike Judge, Mike Bolton. He actually says He says Mike Bolton at one point, which really annoys the consultants who love Michael Bolton. It's just a funny movie. I just don't want to get too much into it. It's such a funny movie, but it really gets into that sense. For example, like Josh, I'm not going to say this myself. When you worked in these office spaces, did you feel like the work mattered to others, that you cared?
I was just there to do as little as possible, to get as much compensation as possible, and to preserve my headspace and creative energy for other pursuits. Always. I always had something I'd rather be doing. I was always working on something else. I was using them, they were using me. That was it. It was my personal life was completely separate. I had Josh work self and Josh home self, and I didn't cross them very much.
You know what's funny? Because Peter, when he goes to see that hypnotist, actually gives the plot for Severance. He asks the hypnotist, could you just make it so that I'm, like, when I go to work, I'm out fishing? Like, I don't remember the entire workday. Like, all I remember is fishing. He says this to the therapist. Isn't it? That's Severance. That's Severance.
It's
very funny. That's Severance.
Wow.
It's really interesting. I wonder if Ben Stiller's giving some credit to OfficeSpace. And the other part of what you just said is that Peter gets this hypnotism thing is a plot device so that Peter gets a spine. And when these consultants come in to Initech to downsize the company, he basically tells them the truth, which is exactly what you just said, but you wouldn't say that to anybody. He says, I come in, I stare at my screen for an hour and just stare at it. Then when I come back from lunch, I stare at it for another hour, and he says, I basically do 15 minutes of work the entire week. And that's because he's been hypnotized to this space where he doesn't care. That's the only reason he tells and the consultants actually promote him, funny enough, from that. They love his honesty, which is some of the irony here. So that space that you're in, you want to work on other things. What it does is creates a sense of, I don't really care about this place or anything that happens. And Mike Judge does a great job of that here. And this is going to set up the fraud that takes place. And there's a question about, and I always had this question when I saw the movie because of the fraud that you read, but we'll get into it. Was this fraud based on a real life, like a real life fraud? Or did they write it for the movie? And the answer to that is super funny, super interesting. So Josh, when you watch this film, what did you feel coming out of it? Did you feel like it spoke to you, or was it just a comedy that you just laughed at? What did it leave you feeling? Heard, seen? What was the feeling?
Yeah, definitely heard and seen. It encapsulated the feelings I felt going into an office. It almost felt like I felt justified with how dead inside I felt going into these places, and the rage and the absurdity of these places was so embodied by these different characters. One was angry, one was just detached, and one was keen. Like the guy who came, he was an immigrant. He was just like, I'm just happy I'm not in Riyadh, like the American dream is possible. And yeah, although he was going to be downsized, even though he worked so hard, and that was incredibly unfair. So the unfairness as well.
Yeah, you can relate to it. I'll tell you, so my background, I was working at Deloitte, and it's a CPA firm at the time this movie came out. And I remember I went on a date, and I remember going to see this movie. I had no idea what it was about, but I looked interesting from the commercial I saw at the time, the trailer with a voiceover. And it felt like there was only 10 people in the theater. It wasn't a lot of people. And I watched this film, and I thought, I love this film. I love it because they captured my feeling at that point that I didn't feel connected. Part of that is just, I just wasn't into what I was doing. I felt very much connected to Peter. Mm-hmm. But you mentioned this already, because working at Deloitte at the time, you had to print everything, and a lot of times with urgency. And I can't tell you how often back in the 90s, printing things was like torture. And if you open up link 3, the YouTube link 3, I think that's the one you referred to. I think I almost fell out of my seat. I think I almost died of laughter. I'll set this up. They have a printer that causes them throughout the beginning of the movie problems. And Samir, she just starts swearing at it. The funniest one to me was when Michael Bolton, he was an actor off Mad TV. Michael Bolton is just having a conversation. He looked and it says, "What the fuck is PC load letter?"
Yeah.
And I remember having that exact same thought. What the fuck is PC load letter? This thing is not, what does that even mean? Why am I not getting the print job I need desperately right now? And this printer, I remember this printer at Deloitte, I hated it. And you could play the scene. This is the scene where they decide to take out their angst on this printer.
I'm going to play it. Okay, here we go.
You had to play it all the way to the end, too. Michael Bolton is
Started punching the printer at a certain point. He drops the baseball bat. They've been beating this printer, kicking it, throwing it, and then Michael Bolton gets down on his knees, started physically punching. Like he's going to draw blood.
He's like really punching it. So they take this printer because they know they're going to commit a crime. They decide to take the print, and they also know, two of them know they're going to get fired. They decide to steal this printer that's been causing them so much trouble, take it out into a field and beat the crap out of it with a bat, kicking it. Samir's leg almost goes up to his nose. It was an amazing leg drop.
Yeah.
When I saw that scene, I thought I still can't, the amount of laughter that came from me from that scene, because it was so cathartic.
It was so cathartic. To me, the movie's first half is the office frustration, and it culminates in this printer. They steal from the office, they kick the crap out of the printer. And to me, this is often where I was like, I got everything I need, and I would pause the movie. And I didn't even have to watch the rest of the movie. Because it goes into some different places, but to me, this was like, this is the end of the movie. If it ended here, I would be totally satisfied.
It's funny that you say that, because it could have ended there, right? Because you're right. That printer destruction was something that any office worker at the time in the 90s where you were printing, and the frustration that was happening because Initech was also not respecting their employees. There were so many things. Their bosses didn't care. Peter had to come in on the weekend. These consultants. It was just like this lack of care. Second half of the film is actually important to our podcast, because let's set up the fraud risk triangle. We have rationalization, opportunity, and incentive. All right. So let's get into the rationalization, because that's basically what we've been talking about. So Peter's been hypnotized. He gets promoted by these consultants who are downsizing Initech, this computer software company that works on bank code. They're actually, do you know what they're working on this? Because I watched this film. Do you know what they're programming?
It's Y2K stuff, isn't it?
You are on. I watched this yesterday. You got a good memory for this stuff. Exactly. It explains to Jennifer Aniston, later becomes his girlfriend, not girlfriend, minor part of the story, that he has to replace code that has, they decided to only put 9.8 instead of 1998, and the year 2000 is approaching, and Y2K stuff. They're downsizing the company. That's what Peter's doing. He gets promoted, but Samir and Michael, the three of them are really the main characters. They're going to get fired. Michael Bolton has had this sort of idea, just fun idea, of committing a crime. And he throws it off, and nobody ever listens to him. Once the downsizing happens, Peter gets inspired to actually commit the crime. But what would you say is the rationalization here from the three of them? Because Samir has to be convinced. They meet all three of them to say, let's do this. And we'll talk about the actual crime itself. Do you remember what the rationalization for all three of them, Michael Bolton, Samir, and Peter, to say, let's do this?
Yeah, I think it was just unfairness. Like, Michael Bolton and Samir found out they were scheduled to be laid off, even though they were giving their all. Peter was promoted for just being real with the company and saying he didn't give a shit. And it just seemed like totally upside down. And yeah, nobody was being respected. And I feel like they felt totally justified because they weren't being treated like you wouldn't treat a person that way if you had any respect for them. So they felt disrespected.
We're not saying that employees that feel disrespected are more likely to commit crimes, but I think what we're saying here, he captured this, right? Because these employees, they were working really hard. Samir was working really hard. I mean, this is a comedy, but he does a good job of making them say, we work hard. We're the hardest working people here. Why are we getting fired? Why don't people care about us? And they don't really want to commit this crime until they know they're going to get let go. But there's also a detachment. This is something that we can think about sometimes when we talk about organizations. One of the best ways to prevent fraud is to make sure people feel motivated and connected and cared for. You usually don't want to hurt the thing that you care for, right? And that's exactly what happens here. In tech, very little people care for it except for the bosses who are making money off. They have the salary, and Lumberg has the Porsche, the boss guy. So you're right, the rationalization is there. So the incentive, the reason to do this, now once they can convince themselves we can because we hate this company, that there is a plan. Like, there's an opportunity. Let's actually get more of the opportunity. Do you remember what happens? Do you remember how they decide to commit this? And this is occupational fraud, by the way, just to be technical here. Do you remember what they do?
Yeah. As I remember, Michael Bolton has this idea to every transaction the company makes, they're going to take a point, like something off the penny. Like it's like basically a rounding error. They're going to round portion of every penny to their own personal account, and over time it's going to add up, but it's supposed to be like just like little tiny transactions. I don't know if that's describing it very well.
No, you did a great job, and it's over years, right?
Yeah.
And so Peter really convinces Samir and Michael Bolton, because Samir definitely doesn't want to do this. He's never committed a crime, but Peter makes the rationalization. Hey, look how they treated you. You worked your whole life, and they're going to just discard you. And this is only pennies, like very little dollars, like rounding off a rounding error that's going to accumulate over time, years, to be something that's meaningful. So you explained it really well. And Michael Bolton has this virus that he's developed, and that the opportunity, so there's the plan, the opportunity occurs in the film because they are so busy with the downsizing that all three of them feel like no one's going to check this code. They just need to get the code into the mainframe. This is back in 1999, by the way. So floppy disks, all kinds of stuff. I'm gonna give Josh another scene for you to watch, which I think is also hilarious because it plays like some sort of action scene, but it's really just a disk going into a hard drive. So that's the idea, and the opportunity really is there because there's no controls over the mainframe to install this virus, and there's no supervision. Nobody's really monitoring the code, and they also realize that this small amount, the occupational fraud, isn't large enough that anyone would notice, below what maybe we'd call materiality in the accounting space. So that's exactly the opportunity. The incentive is, hey, they're going to make some money for sure. There's money to be made over time. They've got the rationalization. This company has really treated them like dirt, and they decide to execute it. Josh, do you want to play Link 4? You could tell us what's happening. Link 4 of the YouTube scene. This is where I thought this scene was hilarious.
Michael Bolton copies the virus onto, I believe it's going to be a floppy disk. And when he clicks the mouse, there's two gunshots in sync with the soundtrack. And to me, the scene is like almost like a prison yard. They're pulling off some sort of a escape. His annoying coworker is saying hello. He hates her. They're walking in slow motion. Okay, it's a hard disk, not a floppy disk.
It's a hard disk.
But it's pretty close. And Peter's about to get the disk. Samir's going to pass it behind the back like they're in the prison yard. Peter puts it in his pocket. He's on the way to the mainframe. Sits down. He's keeping an eye out. Pops it in. Moment of truth. And now he's got to just copy that file, and he's waiting. There's no going back at this point. Download is complete. And it happened. It was kind of easy. Yeah, that's it.
That's what they say. It's built up with this big cinematic scene to music, and it's just like that. All he did was put the disc in the computer.
They didn't have to do any of that. He could have just walked over. They were doing all this surreptitious stuff.
They would like play like a heist film or a prison scene, whatever, like this big drama. All he did was put the floppy disk because there was no controls. There's no issues getting to the mainframe. Nobody really asking what he's doing. So lack of controls, and you have three inspired individuals who rationalize their actions, and there's some not pressure, in this case incentive, because of the money over time. Now, do you remember what happens after this? Because it's supposed to they're going to get these, since Samir and Michael Bolton are going to get fired, Peter might stay at the job. I think he's also going to quit. But do you remember what happens shortly after that renders the whole problematic?
There was a mistake in the code, and instead of withdrawing these pennies over time, it withdrew like all of it all at once, and it was like $300,000 or something, and enough that they're all going to get caught and go to jail in their calculations.
Exactly. So Peter goes to the bank machine where they have this account that's accumulating this. Both maybe he's expecting to see like $1 or $2, sees the receipt $300,600 or something like that, and he loses it. What are you doing? Michael, he's screaming at Michael Bolton. Maybe I made a mistake with the decimal.
Yeah.
And they're all turning on each other, right? And they realize they might go to jail. And they had also, I think, not understood what white-collar crime is, what the punishments were for this. And it dawns on them they might be in big trouble.
When they were planning this, they were weighing the pros and cons, and they were saying, what if we get caught? And one of them, I think, said, we'll just go to some white-collar jail. It's like a country club or whatever. It's not Riyadh. It's some version of... They had an idyllic version of what even a worst-case scenario would be, which probably didn't really match up to what would actually happen, which is jail, which is bad. It's pretty darn bad, even in the best place. We're not in Denmark. Like, this is American prison, which is going to be bad.
Not a Danish prison that they're going to go to. And it is funny because that is part of the rationalization too, right? Even if we get caught, not a big deal. But now they're like, this is $300,000, over $300,000. And so the movie plays out, the character Milton, and if you watch that film again and you listen, because he's speaking under his breath the entire time, this side character, he's based on Mike Judge's cartoon, but he's not a central character in the film, even though he does some things that are important to the film's plot points. He's always saying stuff under, do you remember my favorite line? Do you remember the cake scene? There's office cake.
Yeah.
It's Lumberg, the boss's birthday, and Milton, he's a very interesting character. He's got these big glasses. I forget the actor he plays. He's in a lot of films. He's amazing. He's just a bit awkward, and he's interesting. Do you remember what happens in that scene?
Yeah, we know guys like this. He wants a piece of birthday cake, and he's waiting patiently, and someone tells him he shouldn't cut in line or something. Anyway, he doesn't get a piece of cake. It was like, all he wants is like his red stapler and his birthday cake, and he didn't get a piece. I think that might have been the final straw for...
And under his breath, this is the thing, he speaks under his breath, he's like, the people to cake ratio. He says the people to cake ratio. He just says it, and you know what he means. The number of people in the amount of cake slices, it's not going to work out well for him. And under his breath, the entire movie, he threatens to burn the whole place down. He says it all the time. I'm going to burn this place down. I'm going to burn this place down. Because they keep moving him around. Lumberg moves him to the basement. He's going to burn this place down. And so, just to get past the movie, eventually Peter says, I will take the mea culpa here. I will admit to the crime. We'll get the check for the entire amount. I'll put it under Lumberg's desk, my boss. I'll admit that it was all me because he felt like he was a responsible person. And then he'll go to jail. But Milton does actually, we find he disappears, but he does actually commit arson. And burns Initech to the ground, including all evidence of the crime. And so basically they are free. Peter becomes a construction worker because he doesn't want to go back to office life. And they do have a question at the end. What do you think happened to the money? Do you remember what happens to the money?
Yeah, it ended up with Milton somehow. I'm not quite sure how it happened.
The check was under the door, and Milton's about to burn the place down. So I guess the idea is that he got the check, and then
he just grabbed the check.
In the Caribbean. He grabbed the check, and he's in some sort of beach island, and he's threatening a lot of bad things there, if you actually listen to what he's saying there, because he didn't get his margarita right or whatever. So he does. He says some really like threatening things. So that's the movie. So Josh, what do you think the crime, like, we know the OfficeSpace sort of atmosphere, what we connected to, that was inspired by Mike Judge's experience as an engineer working in an office. But what about the crime itself? Because we've connected this because this is fraud complex. We talked about a crime that took place in this movie. We said rationalization, incentive, and opportunity. Talked about controls. What do you think was the inspiration for that?
For the crime, just because you mentioned copycats earlier, I'm curious now if this was something that had actually happened, or this is something that they made up which inspired people to actually give it a try.
You are a smart individual, because I thought the crime itself felt like something that had happened. Like the crime that they did in the movie was based on a real life crime. And when you research it, it's vague. If this ever happened, maybe. Do you know what Mike Judge really used? And he actually just says it in the film as the inspiration. And it's true. They say it in the film. And to be honest with you, I totally agree with what the film says about this other film. Do you remember what the inspiration was? They say it in the film.
Oh, I don't remember.
I'm excited to tell you.
Yeah.
So, I love Superman. I love Christopher Reeve. I love Superman 1 and 2. Superman 3 had Richard Pryor, and it took some interesting turns. If you remember Superman 3, it is bizarre, but I loved it. In Superman 3, why am I talking about Superman 3? In Superman 3, Richard Pryor does this.
Really?
Richard Pryor is amazing with computers. Superman 3 is insane. Richard Pryor is somehow, I don't even know what he's doing in the film, but on a cigarette package, he finds a job opportunity to work as a computer programmer. If this is what I remember, for the supervillain that ends up being the supervillain of the film, and he's so good at programming that he decides to do this thing, the penny thing. And he actually, I think he makes the same mistake. He gets caught, and then the supervillain decides to use Richard Pryor's computer programming skills to destroy Superman. That is the plot of Superman 3. It is an amazing film. Highly recommend.
I got it.
But it's weird. But that's actually the inspiration for this. It's Richard Pryor in Superman 3.
Wow.
So it wasn't inspired by a real crime. Was this inspired? No, it was inspired by Superman 3. But did this inspire others? That is a good question, Josh. And that's why it's on the Fraud Complex. Josh, you want to read the New York Times headline that you see in front of you?
OfficeSpace inspired engineer's theft scheme, police say. It goes on. The authorities said a software engineer in Washington state stole more than $300,000 from his employer and named the scheme after the 1999 workplace comedy. What? I had not heard of this.
This happened December 2022. I think this is when he got charged, but he's been doing it around that time. Yeah, so this is a copycat crime based on the film.
Wow.
So this is the
It took a few years.
This software.
It took 20 years.
20 years. That's what makes it a cult classic. It needs to season itself before someone sees that there's real instructional value to this movie. It's not just the comedy, the workplace observation. There's instructions to commit fraud in here that someone hasn't taken an opportunity until Valdez Castro of Tacoma, Washington, who did this. So this software engineer siphoned more than $300,000 through a series of malicious software edits. Not in exactly the same way with the rounding, but inspired. And I think he actually, if I remember this correctly from reading this, he called the software OfficeSpace.
Wait, so was it a gradual siphoning over time, or did they indicate that at all, or was it more like a one big kind of whopper siphon?
He got caught very quickly after he started this. To just set the fraud risk triangle up, I think Zully is the name of it's an online retailer, Zully. And Castro is a software engineer who works there. So it's online retail. He works there. He's programming, inspired by OfficeSpace. So in the spring of 2022, Castro begins to edit Zully's software code in ways that allow him to steal. We'll talk about what he does because it is different. But let's go to the frauder's triangle. We don't get a whole bunch of information about Castro, but what do you think his rationalization was?
Greed, perhaps, but maybe like many office workers, he felt invisible, felt unappreciated, felt his job was... If this was 2022, that's a period when engineering jobs aren't quite as stable as they might have been the previous decade, and maybe felt like he had to build a nest egg.
That's the detail I don't have, but I think you're on to something, right? It's this very similar to Peter, Sam, and Michael. He's disgruntled, he's upset. He actually says F him in the report when they asked him, why did he do this? Why did he steal from the company? He has that same sort of disconnect, and he feels like this company doesn't care about him. I mean, I'm reading into it, but there's a lot of that. So the scheme he did was interesting. So what he did, he's diverting shipping fees from some customers to an account controlled on the payment processing site Stripe. So there's a diversion. It's not the same idea of rounding off dollars that the film went into, but it's the idea of using code to take money out of one process and move it into another. And in this case, shipping fees maybe won't be noticed, even though it was noticed pretty quickly. And he wrote a replacement code that double charged some customers. So there's one diverting shipping fees to him, and then another where he double charged so that the customers were actually paying twice, and he could take the other portion, which is really smart because then nobody would notice. At least if the customers didn't notice, the company wouldn't because they're getting the shipping fees. And so this was accumulating money through customers in these shipping fees, and through his code, he really had to just install the code. I don't think there was a scene like there was in OfficeSpace where he's like with the floppy disk and
chose to use a floppy disk approach just as an homage to the cult classic. That's pretty interesting. In a way, though, it seemed like maybe their controls were properly in place. They caught him pretty quickly.
I think so. In some ways, this is a success story because they caught him. But the other is, again, access. Because why did the software engineer have access? Because it's multiple fronts. So there's the ship. So because he's doing multiple things. So you ask, why does he have access to the shipping? Why can he double entry the shipping costs? Why can he divert shipping? Definitely there's control problems.
Yeah.
And so here's the other thing he did, which I think is really fun. This is from the article. Mr. Castro, because he does this in three ways. It's like the diverting of the shipping funds, the duplication, and the other way, the third way, is he manipulated the prices sold on Zully. So for example, they give this one example that there's a sofa bed. His software goes in and changes the sofa bed to be pennies on the dollar. So maybe it's like $1,000 sofa bed, and it's now worth $200 or $100. He goes in and buys it at the price that his software has lowered it to. And he's collecting assets of Zully's this way to resell.
Wow. Okay. You got to give this guy a little bit of props for create a little outside of the box thinking.
Yeah. I think so too, because these are the three codes. So three types of malicious code. The one to divert shipping funds, duplicate shipping funds, and then lower the prices. He called it the OfficeSpace project when they found the laptop.
Again,
it was called OfficeSpace project.
The consistent theme throughout a lot of these is a very, in some ways, inspired, innovative person has had enough, decides to pull off some fraud. But if they had just put a fraction of that effort into a legitimate business, if you could think outside of the box and start a legit enterprise using these strategies to actually, I just think making money is not out of reach for people who are willing to go to exorbitant lengths. You could do it legitimately. You'd probably make a lot more money.
I think so too, but I think this is why OfficeSpace inspired him, because I think maybe he looked at himself like I don't know much about Mr. Castro, but I can read into a sense of dissatisfaction. Because just let me tell you the details, because they caught him. The total amount was, how much was it? They have the $302,000.
It mirrored the amount of OfficeSpace.
It did. It's very close to the amount. So the other thing too, that's a lot of money because it's basically the spring of 2022 to June of 2022.
Oh,
Yeah, is that true? I'm looking at this. If that's the case, that looks to be the timeline. Because he was hired in 2018. But it looks like in the spring of 2022, that's when... So he went big. He didn't take pennies here. He went all in. And this is a lot of money in a short space of time. But what was interesting, because they caught him. He was arrested. He's been charged. I don't exactly know what's happened to him. I'm sure he got a sentenced. But they said, hey, where's all the stuff like on the third malicious code that lowered the prices?
Yeah.
They're like, where's the stuff? Because you bought a bunch of stuff. He threw many of the items away once he was fired.
Whoa.
Then what does that tell you about his view of the company?
So he like got a sofa for like $20. That was like $1,000 sofa, and he threw it into a river.
Threw it into a river. Who knows?
Feels like a lot of work. So it seems like that could be trying to cover your tracks, or just seems like that would be a lot of work.
No, it's not covering your tracks because that's the quote I meant. I should give you the full context. This is what. When asked why he never returned the items to Zuli, the company, he said that once they fired him, his opinion was, fuck him.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Just pure emotional, just outrage and hurt and vengeance. Not even self-interest.
Not even self-interest. Right? He could have tried to sell it for more cash, maybe help raise some money for himself, but he just threw it in a river. I like that.
Pay some legal fee. Nope.
Mind.
Yeah.
No, this stuff's all the Zuli sofa beds going into the river. What I like about this too is that I don't think I've read many articles where both OfficeSpace and Superman 3 are quoted as often as they, because in the New York Times, the characters in the film also lifted their scheme from a movie, Superman 3. They should have said the greatest movie, Superman 3, but they left that part out. That movie is crazy. Yeah, so Superman 3, maybe Superman 3 is the problem.
Yeah, I saw it, I believe, as a little kid, and I knew who Richard Pryor was, but I'm really excited to give it a look.
Oh, it is hilarious. Yeah. Like, the choices made in that film. The podcast, How Did This Get Made, which is one of the funniest podcasts, I highly recommend. Oh, yeah. They did Superman 3, and it is hilarious. Because you just wonder what they were thinking in the choices that they made. But Superman 3 inspired OfficeSpace, and OfficeSpace inspired Mr. Castro to steal $300,000, to be exact, $302,278.52.
Yeah.
And we can connect things to the frauders triangle here too, but OfficeSpace inspired this crime, and that's why we can talk about OfficeSpace on the Prod Complex. One, there was an actual fraud that took place in the movie, but also copycatted in real life.
You know, the movie's still popular. Maybe it's inspired copycats that didn't get caught.
Are we rooting for them, Josh? I know with you.
There's some part of me that is, you know what? Pennies on the dollar. Good on you. If you can pull it off and have a little windfall for your retirement, that's just... I'm impressed. I'm not saying it's the right thing to do, but it impresses me.
It impresses me too. So Josh, we're going to leave it at that. I think we might record a bonus section to just go through just the movie itself, some of the quotes from the movie. We might not leave that to our listeners who may have not seen the film. Again, go out and watch this film. Some of that, again, late 1990s, the choices of the music and some of the things, sure, the movie still has a tremendous comic beats. It can get you into that space. PC load letter. Oh my gosh, that printer. Samir swears in the ways of rage and incoherence that I totally get when you're angry. The movie is allotted space because it's a lot of, like, the Ringer blog site that does a lot of pop culture. They did a whole thing on it, an oral history of the film. It's like one of Mike Judge's like biggest things besides Beavis and Butthead, and he's done some other things as well, but this one sort of is in there in the pantheon. Josh, any last thoughts, anything you want to share about our OfficeSpace becoming a movie, then becoming a real crime?
The one thing we didn't touch on in the movie, which left an impression too, there was a whole other side of a different kind of company, which was like the restaurant business. And it was like the staff, the servers there had to wear buttons. They were called pieces of flair. And it was like performative. How many pieces of flair you had suggested to your boss how into your job you were. And one guy had 100 pieces of flair, but Jennifer Aniston had the minimum, like 8 pieces of
15.
flair.
She had 15. I just saw this. She had 15 pieces.
And it's like that kind of nonsense. Like she was a perfectly good at her job. And yeah, maybe it wasn't her whole life, but there was this keen guy who was like overdoing it. And I don't know. It was like a company that wanted more. It wanted your soul, not just your hours. And that also resonated with me. But she didn't have a scheme to defraud that company. She was just trying to
Jennifer Aniston. And in fact, she's the moral center of the film, because when Peter tells Jennifer Aniston, who's a waitress at this restaurant across the street from Initech, that he meets because he's been hypnotized, he has this verve, and he gets the courage because it's Jennifer Aniston. You know, should she be working as a waitress it's called Chotsky's, I think, the restaurant. That one was probably the most unbelievable part of the film. I'm like, that's Jennifer Aniston. This is Rachel Jennifer Aniston. But he gets the nerve to go ask her out. But then they start dating. When Peter tells her the plan, she's like, why are you doing this? This is wrong.
Yeah.
This is what are you getting out of this? And she actually makes a really compelling case. And I never thought about it that way, but you're making a really good observation that the film gives this restaurant sort of another look at employees and employee engagement and what it means to have people connected and caring and doing good work, and why take that away from somebody who just wants to do their job. And there's a theme of that in that film, because that can lead to not necessarily fraud, because in this case Jennifer Aniston doesn't commit fraud, she quits, and she was a perfectly good employee. Why would you lose this person? Because she didn't wear a piece of... But the boss of that restaurant is played, I think, by Mike Judge, by the way. Just like,
oh, really? Oh,
I
man.
believe so. Yeah.
Yeah,
There's a lot
that
of
would be
characters in that film.
That would be a fun role. The boss having a concerned sit down with the staff who didn't have enough flair. And do you want to do the bare minimum, or do you want to go above and beyond? Like, some people just want to do their job.
I think honestly, when you look at all the things about the way this fraud could have been, the movie fraud, and maybe even the fraud at Zillies, is it really a reason to have an atmosphere that treats people with respect, communicates, motivates, checks in, feedback, really tries to see people's contribution as important and valuable? Is that a fraud deterrent? I would argue it is. I would argue that when you are connected and care about the people that you're working with, even if you really don't care, but if you're connected to your boss and you're connected to the colleagues that you work with, it's very hard to cross that Rubicon to commit a crime like that. If you're just a regular person, it's just really hard to do it.
And even Peter said, if I bust my ass and move a few other units, he doesn't see another dime. And there's something about compensation where it's true. He had fixed income, didn't matter. He just had to show up. He was being paid more for his sitting there in a cubicle for 7.5 hours more than he was for his 15 minutes of work that week. And he suggested, I don't know, maybe we could do a profit. Like, he got promoted, maybe we could do a profit sharing. But like, how many companies do that? And why shouldn't that be a part of Jennifer Aniston's employment? If she does a great job, maybe she gets a few extra tips. So maybe there's even a little bit more value in her role as a...
This is about how we incentivize and motivate people. I know it sounds like, well, we should incentivize and motivate people so they don't commit a crime. That sounds strange. But like, the whole fraud thing is secondary to people working a little bit harder, caring, and you have a caring employee, an engaged employee, and so you don't want to go into a diatribe about this, but I think there's an element of that's in the film, and I think you astutely noted in the restaurant side of the plot, and I think there's something to be said about that. A lot of the organizations where you see these types of fraud, you tend to also see issues in culture, like not systemic issues in culture. And again, it doesn't mean that if you fix culture, you don't need to have locks, you don't need to have safe passwords and security and computer controls, which OfficeSpace did, and neither did Zully's. But it helps. I think it helps a lot. There's so many things I want to talk about. I think we have a subscription side of the podcast that might be unveiled if we have enough content for it. We might just talk about the film. But if you're a fan of the film, maybe we'll just do an extra bit to it. But yeah, I was excited. This was, I forget whose idea this was. I think we have to give full credit to Adam. I think Adam, our producer, suggested we do OfficeSpace.
Yeah, great call.
That's right, isn't it?
I think so,
Great call. Yeah. Watching that printer scene, again, I still hate that printer. Printer caused me so many problems. PC load letter. Yeah, no, this has been great, Josh, and you have a really good working memory of this film. The fact that you remembered...
Most films but especially the first half of this movie, I just love it so much. And there was an emotional connection to so many of these characters' experiences.
I think it's good for people to watch that film to say, I hope my organization doesn't look like this. Regardless of the fraud, I hope it doesn't feel like this to the people who work for me. I think that's not a good thing. All right, Josh, we've come to the end of OfficeSpace. We won't burn down the podcast like Milton burned down Initech. I don't have my sign off, but do you want to take us off?
Yeah, I would just say for listeners, please send us any movies with fraud cases that you would like us to talk about, because I think this is an interesting entry point, and we can look into whether there were copycat versions of the movie you loved. Do movies cause more fraud? Or maybe there's, I don't know, success stories of a good movie that really treated their employees well and prevented fraud. So we'll look at it from both angles.
That's a good question. Does Zully sue the producers of OfficeSpace? Or does Zully, where this company where Mr. Castro committed the fraud, or do they sue the producers of Superman 3? I don't know.
Yeah.
3, the heart of all darkness.
Is there a non-speaking movie, like a silent movie from the 20s that Superman 3 borrowed from? How far back is there a novel? Did Dickens write a novel that inspired...
In the early 20s, you were just actually stealing the literal pennies. There's not a program. You're just like, I'll just chip a piece off a penny.
Yeah,
they
were worth a lot back then.
You just take a hammer and just maybe they won't notice that little 1.2 millimeter of a penny that you're putting into your pocket. Yeah, no, thanks. I think that's a good way to end for us to think about whether movies actually cause crime. I think that was a theory brought up in the 90s with video games. We're here to bring it back. We'll see. Is television and films and video games really good for you, or are they rot for your brain? I think Mike Judge had a particular point of view since he created Beavis and Butthead, which I think at the time spurred that conversation into full gear in the early 2000s and late 90s. But thanks everyone for listening. I recommend you go watch Superman 3 and OfficeSpace.
Of course.
Thanks everyone.